So did the founding fathers actually use the biblical formula? Like, was that present in their conversation, what they were trying to accomplish?
But he said, give to God what is God's. Therefore, setting an open-end statement that everything God is not given to government, you don't give. So you don't give government your worship, for example.
What would socialism be? What is America, the United States of America, and what would we be classified, or what would we have originally been classified in contrast to socialism?
So in socialism, all we're doing is saying we trust the government for all of these things, for our needs, to tell us how to educate our children, to tell us what we should vaccinate, what our healthcare should be. And tragically, what it does is it puts us all below the line of God-given creations, and now we're government creations. So we're patriotic when government is limited, and God remains God as the author of our rights.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic week. We are here with Jake MacAulay, and Jake is a Constitution expert, right, Jake? That's how you would classify yourself?
I've never done that, but a lot of people do, so I'll take it.
I'm gonna classify you as a Constitution expert. You have written our Civics course, the U.S. Constitution course, which we recommend usually for high school, but right at the present time, there's so much activity going on in our country, and government is one of the things we keep hearing about. We keep hearing words like the government needs to do this, the government needs to manage this, save us, save our economy, whatever. And I thought, man, we've agreed that we're not going to talk about the virus, so we'll put that out. But what we are going to talk about is just government, so that when we watch the news or we see something come up in our feed, we understand who the players are, how they fit, how it fits into the Constitution, and just an overview that can help us kind of navigate the noise, if you will, of this government. So thank you for joining me, Jake. I appreciate it.
You got it. I appreciate all the work you all do, and all of you amazing women out there, and dads, if you're watching. You guys are definitely the heartbeat and also the backbone of America. You're raising the next generation correctly, biblical worldview, and I'm grateful for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, we are too. And just because of the feeds and the internet and lags and like that, his mouth may not always match the audio, but that's okay. We're going to get content. So let me ask you, Jake, when we're talking about government, so that's a big word. First, on the macro level, we have the federal government and then state government. How can you just help us kind of give us where should we even start with a conversation about government?
So I think when it comes to government, there is a civic responsibility that we have as Christians. I want to start there because my faith is what has dictated my work at Institute on the Constitution. And God created mankind. In the book of Genesis, chapter 1, it says that God created Adam and Eve in his own image. So God gave us the right to life, which is a fundamental American right, you might say. We acknowledge the right to life. Secondly, God said, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. He gave us the right to liberty. That was a God-given right. It was not given by government. It wasn't given by your parents. It was given by God. Lastly, he said, take dominion and subdue the land. So as God's stewards with a Christian worldview, we take dominion, and we have the right to property. And what we do with that property is we glorify God as best. This is God's creation. So we have three fundamental rights that exist the moment we're created. And I want everybody to take note. We are not born equal. That is a misnomer. It's something that has kind of crept into our style of thinking. Somehow we're born equal. We're not. We are created equal. The Declaration of Independence says, hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So if you're created, obviously, you have these God-given rights that God gave in Genesis chapter 1. Our founding fathers read the Bibles. They They understood those rights, they codified them in American law, and they wrote the Declaration of Independence. And when we have those rights as created individuals, now we have the right to express them. Now here's the problem. Many people in our culture, because of a sin nature, and we all have a sin nature. I was my own worst tyrant for 17 years of my life until Jesus got a hold of me fully and radically changed my world. And I was born again. And that experience has forever changed everything in Jake MacAulay's world. I'm no longer a tyrant to myself. I've given that authority to my God now. And so many people in our culture, in our country, throughout the world, have a sinful nature and sinful tendencies. Therefore, they sometimes like to get a piece of your life, liberty, or property, if you will. I'm using kind of kid lingo here. I want a piece of that. Now that's unlawful, because when God gave those rights, he also created a law, because he knew our flesh, he knew our sin tendencies that were manifest. And he said, you do have a right to life, so I have to create a law that says, thou shalt not what? Murder. So that negative command protects a positive right that we have. Thou shalt not murder. Next, he said you have the right to property, and therefore I have to put the law out there and I have to post it to say thou shalt not steal. That's why theft is wrong, because God gave you a right to property. I also gave you the right to liberty. Therefore he said thou shalt not bear false witness. So when you go to court, you cannot be perjured. In other words, somebody cannot lie about you, and then you become criminally convicted and lose your right to life, liberty, or property. And it says in the Fifth Amendment to the Bill of Rights that no person shall forfeit the right to life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So unless a crime has been committed, unless you've broken the law, you still maintain your rights. So there is a mechanism and there is a function that needs to enforce that law. Just like when two teams are playing a game, tragically it won't be the Olympics this year, but when two teams are playing a game, you are gonna have referees officiating. Even though both teams know the rules, even though both teams have memorized them, both teams are trying to win, and they'll do anything it takes to win. So therefore, the referees are put in place to enforce the law and the rules. Now notice the refs did not make the laws or the rules. No more does a Supreme Court, for example. They do not make the law or create the law. Their job, like referees, is to enforce the law to those two parties. So government exists as God's benevolent love to his creation to protect us, to defend us. And it says in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator, certain unalienable rights. So all these things are God-birthed, and that's acknowledged. That's American. It's tough being an atheist and trying to defend God-given rights if you don't believe in the God that gave the rights, because then we turn man into God, or government into God, or whatever's powerful into God, or military, or whatever. Or security sometimes. So once that happens, we identify that God gave those rights, then it says in the Declaration, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So God gave government to protect your rights. We find that in Romans 13. We also find the way that we elect our leaders in America in the book of Exodus, where Moses' father-in-law, the brilliant man, comes and says, look, you need to delegate this government authority. It can be one person. No one person can do this. You got to break it down into divisions. And so then Moses said, choose from among you men of truth, hate covetousness, able men, and place them as rulers over you, over thousands, over hundreds, over 50s, and over 10s. That breakdown is what we have in America. It's a vertical distribution of power. We have rulers over thousands, which would be a federal jurisdiction to defend our borders and the commerce between the states, not within the states, between the states, and settle disputes. Next, we have a state government, which sits right underneath that. That state government is a ruler of hundreds. And then underneath that, you have a local government, rulers of 50s. That would be your county government. Your sheriff would be the executive in that instance, the chief law enforcement official. And then below that, you have rulers of 10s. This would be family government. So that's how the breakdown comes. That's how the breakdown happens in these United States. And again, its source, we find these sources and underpinnings in the Bible. Believe it or not, to many of the skeptics out there. And that's what I want my young people to know. There's a higher God, because if not, tragically, we have, just as people in general, just as in the book of Judges, we have a tendency to say, place man as our king. God, that's great. You know you exist somewhere up there, but man, we just want somebody to tell us what to do and lead us, guys, as un-American. It's unchristian, it's unbiblical as well.
So did the founding fathers actually use the biblical formula? Like, was that present in their conversation, what they were trying to accomplish?
Precisely. And some of the main thinkers that our founders were quoting, remember, our founders had had several thousand years of studying history to create this government system. And that's not easy. Anytime the Democrats try to pass a bill, the Republicans want to hold it up. Anytime the Republicans try to pass a bill, the Democrats want to hold it up. Our founders didn't have to deal with that. They dealt with each other in the way that they wanted to put their best foot forward. At that particular time, most of them were homeschooled. If they were university educated, these were Bible institutions that gave seminary degrees and Bible majors that taught Hebrew, that taught the law of God, as Jesus. And also contemporary thinkers of that time were men like William Blackstone, who put together the English common law, which is all based off of the Bible and scripture references all through it. Why? Because if God gives us our rights, God gave us the law to protect those rights. It's the same reason we put a wall around the city, to protect the city. Now, if we want to go outside of the law, we become an outlaw. And now we don't have a right to do that. We're now persecuted by the law. So men like Blackstone, and then you get into like Montesquieu, John Locke, these were the main thinkers of that time. Many of them, during the Enlightenment, of course, in the 1700s in England, but we didn't take on their atheistic or deistic mindset. Otherwise, we would have never wasted our time praying. Our first few presidents would have never declared a proclamation of prayer and thanksgiving, fasting. These were Christian men that used the suppositions that were postulated in the Bible. We get chapter and verse. We have a course, of course, with master books where we show where our founders quoted scripture to put this concept in, and so on. And there's a variety of those. I don't mean to get off track, but yes, the Bible underpins this concept.
Okay, so we'll start at the thousands, the federal government. Of course, the president is the most visible, well-known, but explain the breakdown of federal government and how that affects me.
You got it. And this is something important too for a lot of parents that get our course to teach their kids. It's DVD driven, so you get a DVD, you watch these lectures. And one of the lectures, we talk about each branch of government. So there's Article 1, which deals with the most important branch of government, and that is Congress. What is Congress comprised of? A House of Representatives and a Senate. What in the world is the House of Representatives and the Senate? The Senate was created, and it was kind of patterned after the House of Lords in England. This was more kind of from the aristocratic culture because there wasn't as many of them. And our smaller states in our union said, hey, we don't want to be out-represented. Otherwise, you're going to treat us like the armpit of these colonies. So Rhode Island, for example, couldn't even compare to the population of New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia. They said, well, we're just going to get marginalized and pushed out and used. So we need equal representation. So one of the compromises that the large states made with the smaller states is, look, we will have 2 houses in our Congress. We will have a Senate, which each state will get 2 senators. So even a teeny little state like Delaware has just as powerful representation as a state like New York. Now, New York was upset because they're like, well, we have way more people than you. Are you saying your people are worth more than ours? Because when you consolidate all of the votes that we get, if each only get 2, then we're going to get outvoted by the little guy, and we're going to be abused.
Right.
And so to solve that problem, we have what's called the House of Representatives. So based on your population, which is based on the census taken by each state, and I know we have a question about the census we'll talk about in a little bit. Based on your population, you get an amount of representatives in the House. Now, the beautiful way that this breaks down is, what is the difference between the Senate and the House of Representatives? Well, the House of Representatives is a closer representation of people. Up until we created an amendment to make it popularly voting for senators, the state legislatures used to send senators to Capitol Hill. And when they didn't like how that senator, when they didn't like how that senator was voting or activating, they could recall him right away. They didn't need to do a vote and would send somebody. It's a beautiful thing, a great check. Now we popularly elect, but let me break this down. All revenue bills, anytime government is going to spend money, that revenue bill has to start with the people's representatives, which would be your House of Representatives, where every single county is heard because we all have our representatives from different counties in the state. Now, once that's originated, it cannot pass until the second branch of government gets it, which would be the Senate. Now, there's different bills and statutory regulations and so on that can be originated in each of the houses. But I think that the money is what we all really care about. You know, if you're going to spend money to do something, then you need to know what that is. But both houses of Congress have to pass this bill, and they have to pass it by a majority. So, 51 to 49. So however that works. That slows legislative process down. It makes it complicated. Which frankly, that's what we want. Because we really don't want our federal government doing a whole lot other than protecting us. We want our state governments taking care of us because they're the closest thing to us. It's a lot easier to get in touch with local government and state government than it is federal government. So we have that federal government, but we only have one. We have 50 state governments, which have the power. It was the state governments that created this federal government because we saw, hey, as a country, as these United States, we need protection. And we need a branch of government that can get things done. And they were very limited after the war, or the war of resistance or the Revolutionary War against the British, because we didn't really have much of a federal system. And so other countries were taking advantage of that and setting states against each other and kind of turned into a mess. And we talk about that in the course. So it's really beautiful how this all came to be, how it was articulated, how it was postulated, the brilliance of the minds that put it together, and how all the states work together to get this thing ratified so that we could have the longest standing current constitution in the world right now.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Jake, do you have the headphone? Are you able to switch over to the head mic?
Yeah, I can put something on.
There's just a little bit of echo, and maybe we could get it a little clearer.
No problem. By the way, if anybody is interested, actually, let me plug these in quick.
So if you're just joining us, we're talking with Jake MacAulay, who is a Constitution expert. He is also the author of our Constitution. Yeah, I think so.
You can hear me a little bit better here?
Much better, much better.
Okay, so
Yeah.
fantastic. Sorry about that.
Way better. No,
if
that's all
anyone's
right.
interested, government oftentimes will put forth a bill, a revenue bill, for example. Right now, there's the giant debate over the largest stimulus bill that's ever been put forth by Congress. Article 1, Section 8. If you learn anything right now, and you want to read the Constitution, and you're not a fan of what government has done with individual liberties and how we've been out taxed and how we're bloated and how we're in debt, just go to Article 1, Section 8, because that will outline everything that the federal government has the legal authority to tax and spend for. Tragically, close to 80%, and I'm being conservative there, of what government is spending money on is not found in the Constitution. And that's the tragedy of our day. And so our money is being taken from us through taxes, but unauthorized use of it to spend.
Interesting. So, okay, so I get it. You have the states, they send the representatives, House representatives represent the state. Then it passes to the Senate, right? Senate being a smaller body.
Yep.
And
yes,
but they are also elected from the state, or how does senators get into position?
So senators are now elected popularly. So in other words, everybody in the state votes for their 2 senators.
Okay.
In the past, because the Senate was supposed to be more of a direct representation, of the state government, of the state and how it was represented in its government. So that was how they were appointed and delegated and regulated. Now it's a popular vote, which has moved more to a democracy.
Okay.
And so I'll explain to you the danger of that a little bit later. But the House of Representatives was like, the Daniel Boone. He'd come in and hang his coonskin hat on there. And he was just a man like me and you. You know, he understood what it was like to, you know, do this and that. He wasn't a politician. He was a guy that was impacted every day by politicians.
Okay.
The Senate could speak a little bit more directly to, you know, maybe these were the guys that had the degrees in college that understood how government works, and they were a little sharper, a little far-sighted. So you got kind of I wouldn't call it the upper echelon, but almost the aristocracy, maybe the landowners, the people that had seen, you know, government and studied government, political science and so on. You had those guys arguing with the common guy, and you had both houses that were very jealous of their power. The closer one was to us. Now, once that bill passes and both houses get it, it's going to go to your president. And your president is the second most power, has the second most delegated authorities. This is Article 2. In Article 2, it's going to highlight, but Congress far surpasses the authority of of the president. And one thing that we need to realize as well is that the president has no law-making authority. The president cannot pass a law. He is one person. His job is to defend. He's the commander-in-chief in the armed forces. When war is declared, he can't just take our troops and go do whatever he wants. Congress has to agree to this. It's a partnership there. And the reason why is because we had a tyrant king, and we didn't like how that worked. And many of our founders were even jealous of the power that the president had in the very beginning of the Constitution, which I wish everybody act like Washington. But that president now takes that bill that's put on his desk. Now, he cannot line item veto. In other words, he can't say, well, I'll sign this into law, but we're going to take this, this, and this out. Some governments in states, their governor can do that. Say, yeah, I'll pass this, but I'm crossing this out and this out and this out, and it's passed. He either passes it or he vetoes it and sends it back to Congress where they argue and debate, and then it comes back to him again.
So when it goes back, does it have to go back through both houses?
Yep,
okay.
Sure would. Both have to agree to it. So maybe one sends it back. Yeah, they're both going to have to write it up, and they have various committees based on a lot of things like seniority and political clout and so on. So this is a very messy, time-consuming process. Most of us, day to day, we don't like it. We don't want to pay attention to it. We'd rather just go to work, vote for a guy once every couple of years, and then stop paying attention. And listen, I get that. It's very burdensome and cumbersome to try to follow every single election and know all of their character and so on, which tragically has led us to just trust our political party and hope for the best. But that's also the reason why our representatives are behaving the way that they are. Just like a child who's unwatched, he's going to eventually do what's in his own heart. But so to get back to this, if the president signs this, now it becomes statutory law. I want to go back to a very important part. Our president, usually we've heard the term executive order. And I'm sure many of the viewers have heard executive order. What is an executive order? Well, it's when the executive, which would be the president, issues an order, declares an order. Those orders, for example, if he's at the front of the line and his troops are with him and he issues an order, go take this mountain, go take this armory, take this magazine, attack, that would be an example of an executive order. He can only order things he has authority in. He cannot executively order, for example, like the last president, that all public schools need to make women's bathrooms available for men. And I don't mean to be coy on that statement, but that's just something that came to mind really quickly. So that's not, he has no legal or lawful, because the first sentence in the Constitution after the preamble says all legislative authority is vested in a bicameral legislature. So again, that bounces back to Congress.
Okay.
Which is why, again, if you're a pro-life person, you don't need to fund new legislation. Our legislation in America already protects the unborn because it acknowledges they're created in God's image and have the right to life. The Declaration of Independence still says that. Fifth Amendment to the Bill of Rights, the 14th Amendment to the Bill of Rights still acknowledge that all created people have the right to life, liberty, and property, pursuit of happiness. So just because a court, for example, makes a bad ruling, and courts are prone to do that, they're people. Mm-hmm. That does not make that bad ruling applicable or legislatively binding on anyone. Decision only impacts the two parties in front of them. So a great example of that is Roe versus Wade, just an example of life again. That affected the parties before them, which gratefully Norman McCorvey who was the one who won that case, never ended up getting an abortion. And then she turned pro-life, and then she became born again, and she was a champion for the pro-life movement, going to the Supreme Court every year on the anniversary, pleading with them to reverse that decision. And a lot of people have different viewpoints on that, but I'm just making the point there. When you look to the courts to pass the law, then guess who you're ignoring? You're ignoring all of your state representatives, you're ignoring your Senate, and you're ignoring the procedure that we have. And so if I'm a nefarious thinking person, guess what I'm going to do? Oh, let's just handle everything in the courts. Let's just ramrod what we want through the president. Nobody's paying attention anyways. It's a heck of a lot easier than getting 435 people arguing and bickering because they each have their own political interests. To get them to agree on something is impossible. Just get a couple judges. If we can just get five out of 9, we're golden. Or if we can get a president to just issue a proclamation, we're golden. That's dangerous. And it's a direct assault into our personal liberties, or at least it will be. Sets the stage to be.
Because in a way, some of the societies before us that had issues, like a king who could be impulsive or psycho, or even a legislative body that there was no checks and balances, you basically are falling back into those precedents that could cause issues.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the president would be the one who signs into law, and then what is the role of the Supreme Court? Would that be the judicial?
Yep. So the judiciary, again, this is going into the Constitution. We can find the Supreme Court's jurisdiction in Article 3. So I just want to take a little bit of time to kind of explain this, and I'm going to go right to our lecture notebook. Because I think it's so imperative that we understand, because nowadays, I always use the analogy whenever I'm traveling. It depends on the state that I'm in. I like doing this in Ohio because they're really, really dedicated to their Buckeyes. And I love doing it in Nebraska because everybody is a Cornhuskers fan there. I don't care how old you are or what you do for work. Everybody turns out in red on Saturday afternoons. But what ends up happening at a ball game or a football game, if the Cornhuskers are playing the Ohio State Buckeyes, just as an example, and the Cornhuskers are actually winning, which probably is never going to happen, but they're beating them 50-0 at halftime, okay? Just imagine. The crowd is hyped. They are going crazy. They are about to win a bowl game. So the referees come out onto the field at halftime and they say, listen, it's been a very bad game. Ohio State, their fans, the state of Ohio feels really bad about themselves right now. This is not fair. This is lopsided. It's one-sided. So in order to make it fair, in the name of decency and justice and humanity, we are going to change the rules. Now, we're the referees. We're the ones that are in charge of enforcing these rules. We're going to change the rules because for almost 100 years we've been playing football, and it's just wrong. It's time to change it. We're evolving in athletics, and it's our time to do it. And so the referees announced this to the fans, all 90,000 of them, or 100, depends where they're playing, I guess. And I asked the crowd that I'm usually speaking or addressing, I say, well, what do you think the crowd would do to those referees? And it's interesting, and I'm trying to draw a response here because fans are very passionate about sports. We in America, I think we are probably the most passionate about our athletics out of anywhere in the world. And so, people say, well, they probably kill them. They'd bum rush the field. They would tear their stripes off and, tar and feather and blah, blah, blah. And I agree. The fans are not going to react well. What certainly is not going to happen is no one's going to sit down, order a beer and a hot dog, and say, well, let's just see how this plays out. That's too bad. Football's ruined. No one's going to sit around and pontificate like that. There's no philosophical discussions. No, you're gone. We'll wait till we get new refs.
Right.
And I asked the crowd, well, why is that? Why do you think people would react? Well, because the referees can't do that. Well, why not? Their job is to apply the rules. Yeah, but they can't make up new rules. Exactly. And neither can a judge. They have no authority to make those rules. And so it's a tragedy because we wouldn't do that in our sports. We wouldn't do that in most areas in our life. Yet we've allowed judicial fiat for multiple decades And this really started to turn in our country during the time of FDR when he tried to stack the court. And then, and this was during a crisis, and it really was a crisis. I mean, we had a depression in World War II. I can't even imagine what they went through. I think we're kind of experiencing small parts of it now. And he was just so annoyed at the Supreme Court not allowing him to do something to save everybody. And the reason the Supreme Court did it is because they swore an oath to uphold the Constitution before Almighty God, number one. Number two, they were very studious. They understood we are a republic. We are different than the rest of the world. We're not a democracy. We're not a socialist country. We're not a communist country. We don't look to government as the source of our rights. And so they said, hey, listen, Mr. President, we appreciate your zeal, your desire for the American people, but our states have to figure this out. Because if you come and you take all this authority and you create systems, you create a pattern, which becomes a very slippery slope, which now when we're no longer in crisis, the government never gives back power, by the way. All these governors saying, oh, we'll let it go back to normal. It won't go back to the way it was, because the seed has been planted in the minds of the people. So that's the tragedy of it. But I guess at that particular time, the court got sick of being bullied or sick of being made look bad, which that'd be a tough situation to be in. I'm not casting stones here. But then the courts started to rule with the president and different things that were unconstitutional, thereby changing the Constitution without even having to struggle.
Okay. So you used the word socialism, and we're hearing that word a lot with different candidates and whatnot. Just briefly, what would socialism be? What is America, the United States of America, and what would we be classified, or what would we have originally been classified in contrast to socialism?
So a socialist state, this is kind of where, and I wish I had my visuals here. Actually, maybe I can just put it up here, and it's in your books too. There's contrasting worldviews of governments. There's one view of government that we call the pagan view of government. I'm going to hold it up right there.
Okay, so we have a biblical view. It's kind of hard to see the biblical view versus the pagan view. The biblical view has divinely ordained.
I'll walk through this. How about that? I just want to hold it up. And I apologize, you can't see the visuals good there, but the biblical view of government says the government is divinely ordained, so it's given by God, but it is not God. It's given by God. And we discussed that in the beginning. Why did God give government? Because he loves his creation. He wants his creation protected. The church has a jurisdiction. The family has a jurisdiction. Government bears the sword to protect and defend the innocent. So he divinely ordains government for that purpose. Secondly, he limits their government. He limits government authority. God never gave government to do whatever it wanted, because then he would be giving over his sovereignty to man and an institution man. What God did by limiting the government is he put them in a box and he said, you are to protect, you are to bear the sword. When wicked men or evildoers break the law, you have the authority from God to enforce the law, apprehend criminals. So that's why cops can't just go around. I ask this in schools all the time. Can police officers sell drugs? No. Well, why not? They're police officers. Well, because it's breaking the law. Exactly. So even though they have a badge and they represent the law, it doesn't mean that everything they do is following the law. That law is above them. They're just agents of the law. And that limited authority is found, even Jesus, he perpetually limited the authority and made it sure and distinct when he said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, because he validated the jurisdiction of Caesar to protect, to defend, and so on, God-given rights. But he said, give to God what is God's, therefore setting an open-end statement that everything God has not given to government, you don't give. So you don't give government your worship, for example. You don't pinch incense to Caesar and the gods. Daniel, Shadrach, and Meshach, and Abednego are another great example. Okay. Joseph is a great example, Moses, and so on. And in fact, all the martyrs that have gone before us. So in the biblical view, God gives government divinely. He limits their authority. This leads to patriotism. When we have a biblical view of government in place, I was speaking at a college 6 years ago, and I had a Christian arguing with me the separation of church and state and so on. And I heard where she was coming from, but sadly and tragically, she was severely misinformed. But anyway, she was postulating this in front of the whole class. I'm like, gosh, girlfriend, you're shooting yourself in the foot. A man stood up and he was a Muslim. And he said, I have moved here 5 years ago from a Muslim country, and I know this is a Christian nation because I know the contrast of it. And I'm glad this is a Christian nation because only in a Christian nation do you have the liberties that you have right now. And it was like a drop the mic moment. I was just like, okay, thank you. So we're patriotic when government is limited and God remains God as the author of our rights.
Right.
And this is what I say, it doesn't matter your sexual persuasion, what you think, as long as your actions do not break the law, you are created in God's image, you have dignity, and government's job is to protect you. But remember, you only have rights to do what are inside of the law. When you go outside of the law, you become an outlaw. You don't have a right to do that because you don't have a right to break the law. So we're all patriotic. Like when I say patriotic, what's the first thing you think of, Randy? Who do you think of? I say patriotism.
Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin, okay, founding fathers. How about somebody in this current day, like when you're at a parade, who are we all patriotic about? When do we all stand during the parade? When who walks by?
The president.
The president, okay. How about before a ball game when they ask all the servicemen and women to stand up? America claps. It's very
Yes.
patriotic. We support our veterans. We love our veterans. Our taxes fund their health care to some extent, or most extent, and their salaries and so on. I even give my own personal money, at the grocery store if they want a donation for veterans groups. I don't even have to be coerced to do this. I want to, because I'm patriotic and I love the fact that they're willing to lay down their life for me. They're doing what government's supposed to do. They're about the only branch of government that is nowadays, tragically. They're securing our God-given rights, as it says in the Declaration of Independence, with their blood. They're not shoving healthcare down your throat. They're not overtaxing you. They're not, so all of those things don't follow in suit. This results in a republic when government is only there to serve, when they acknowledge there's a higher law than themselves. It creates a republic where no matter if the majority agrees that guys doing webcasts with blue shirts should be stricken from the airwaves. Doesn't matter if everybody thinks that. I have God-given rights that supersede the desire of the majority, i.e. a democracy, or the desire of government. So here's where socialism comes in, okay? And this is based off us being created. This is a biblical supposition, Genesis chapter 1, we have a creator God. What socialism and communism and democracies and any other form of government that does not acknowledge the sovereignty of a creator God is a pagan view of government, because it states that government is divine. What do you mean, Jay? Government doesn't really think it's God. Well, you remember the Greek gods? They weren't really known as the God. They had issues too, but they were like these superhumans, right? They were there to protect everybody. Caesar didn't think he was the God. Pharaoh didn't say he was the God, but he was a God. Notice he was higher up in the evolutionary chain than the rest of us. Well, that's what government is saying. We are the divine. We've been put here, and the divine right of kings. Some might say that is symptomatic of this type of thinking, where now the government being divine has unlimited authority. There is no constitution to limit them. Mm-hmm. There's no Bill of Rights to clearly define what the government can't do. And this, of course, is going to lead to state worship. And I always ask the question, what is the quickest way to create a moral person? Is it to give him a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of power, and then he turns into a good guy?
Typically, no.
Well, that's what we've done with government. We've given them a whole bunch of power and access to the purse and the taxing power. Doesn't make them good. So those type of people become corrupted in their mind if they're not held in check, just like we all do. We're all sinners. And sometimes I kind of chuckle because people are so quick to cuss and swear and yell at government officials. And I'm like, buddy, you should be grateful that you're not in that position, because trying to fight that kind of sin is a whole new level. So we should pray for those officials. I'm not saying we tolerate, okay? I pray for my government more than I yell at them. I personally do. And that's not always easy. But we end up worshiping government just like when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I preach this sermon oftentimes when I'm speaking in churches. The king got together and he created an image. Most people think it was of himself. And when you read the text there, he invited every single political leader in all of the kingdoms that he had conquered. All of them showed up. Now, they didn't show up because they thought, yeah, I want to worship a statue today of Nebuchadnezzar. Probably most of these people hated him. I mean, these were conquered provinces. They had to show up to show allegiance, and he was forcing submission on them because he needed to keep everything in line. And that's the problem with a paranoid dictator like Joseph Stalin. He'll kill you if you disagree with him.
Right.
It's America. I mean, Obama and Trump are about the antithesis of each other, but they peacefully pass power from one to the other. And that's a beautiful thing that America can provide. But that state worship results in tyranny, which means we end up serving. So in socialism, all we're doing is saying we trust the government for all of these things, for our needs, to tell us how to educate our children, to tell us what we should vaccinate, what our healthcare should be. And tragically, what it does is it puts us all below the line of God-given creations, and now we're government creations. And that was a very fast statement. I didn't get to backlay it very easily, but that's essentially what it's saying. Because when you try to assert your rights in Tiananmen Square in China, for example, the tank doesn't stop.
So what you're seeing in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is actually then a more of a socialistic model.
That was more of a dictatorship.
A dictator. Okay, so you see more of a dictatorship government, and then you see Shadrach, Meshach, who had placed God as the ultimate authority, and in the contrast. Okay,
that's right. And they would refuse to worship because there was limits and boundaries that God had placed on even government.
Now, let me ask you, you also brought up military. And so in times like this, what protection is built in? Is there protection built in that the government, can the commander-in-chief actually tell the military to turn on the American people? Like, is there, what protection is there in place for that?
So, and I'm just repeating this I've got another live audience that's watching right now. What keeps government from using the military to turn on the American people? I think that's a simplified way that you put that question. So it's great. Number one, in the Constitution, it says that our federal government cannot have a standing army. You remember in World War II, what did we do? Everybody enlisted. We didn't need a draft because that was actually a just cause war. And people argue that because of Vietnam, it's a shortage of, but anyways, there's a whole lot to that. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get sidetracked. But people applied. Then they had to go to basic training. This took months to get our army ready to send over. And by the time they were ready to get over there, this took some time. But why was that? Well, because we don't have a standing army. The way that we originally were set up, and I was just in Virginia not too long ago, talking to a few groups, we would have on a local level what's called a militia. Everybody's heard of the Second Amendment. Congress should make the law, or excuse me, it's the First Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This militia was on a local level organized, and they were under authority. These weren't crazy renegades doing whatever they wanted to do with guns. They had a strict discipline, chain of command, and the sheriff was the one who oversaw this. You may call the sheriff's posse. So those militias, when the state was going to send troops to the federal government because their Congress had declared war and both branches passed it, then it's time for each state to send their militias. So now the authority of the governor was to extract that militia and put it into federal service, whereby enacting the power of the commander-in-chief to, he's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Now, that is why when government utilizes troops against their own people, we've gone down the rabbit hole on this, by the way, but in the old school days, what's he going to do? Send my neighbor who's in the militia after me? He's not going to do that. My state's not going to allow him to do that because my governor says, oh, no, buck stops here, buddy. Your authority comes from me and it stops. There's a few branches of government that we do need to maintain consistently. One is going to be a Navy. We can't just call people up and train them to be naval. That's something that requires consistent training. Another thing would probably be an Air Force as well. You can't just call a guy up and whip him into shape and now he's a great fighter pilot, for example. So there's certain agencies that we maintain consistently through our federal budget and should be maintained. I want them maintained anyhow. But a standing army is not something that's constitutionally authorized. And if the federal government, for example, wanted to send a federal army against one of the states, that's where the states have to step up, for example, and say, hey, look, Arkansas is being attacked right now. You know what that means, right? We're next. So then the states get together, the representatives get together, and they check that president. Like we saw what happened with Soleimani, and I wrote several articles about that particular, the constitutionality of it and so on, which I won't comment on today because it takes a long time to talk about those things. But they'll put that check, which is great. We want the check. We don't want to be unsafe, but we do want to check in case something like what you're describing was to happen.
Now, what happens when government uses words that, like they say, we're in a war, and it's not actually a physical war that would have been defined?
Right.
Does that blur the lines?
So what happens when Congress says, well, we're in a war, for example, a war on terror?
Right.
It does blur lines, tragically. What does a war on terror mean? We've always had terrorism. We always will have terrorism. So in my mind, just right off the bat, I'm thinking, okay, well, this war is never going to end. We have to, when we declare a war, we have to clearly define who is the enemy. And I have many friends that have children that have been killed in conflicts like Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on. And I have many friends who have people serving right now. And one of the biggest complaints of armed forces around the world is that in the rules of engagement, they have to practically wait until they are being close to death to be able to retaliate. And my question is if our troops have to wait till that point, then are they really fighting an enemy here? Why are we there? And so that's the argument being made. But when, for example, in World War II, we had the Allied powers and the Axis powers, and both sides were clearly defined. What was our objective? To join our allies and defeat the enemy. And it's a no holds barred contact, absent, some of the rules of engagement, innocent civilians and so on. In America, I feel I'm not going to comment on that, but those rules of engagement existed. So now with these wars it's a war on terror, we have to be able to present a clear, eminent, present danger to the American people. Clear. Not to our allies, for example. They have their own military. And that sounds disheartening. That almost sounds like I've got no heart saying that. But see, that could open the doors for more. Well, who's our allies? And then we're policing the world, and then it's our budget. It's all on our dime. So there might be an argument to make about France, because everybody's always got to bail them out. But at least when we have this clearly defined enemy, we can now engage in it. So that has to be. Now our Pentagon and everything is in intelligence now, with chemical weaponry and EMPs. War has gotten into a whole new dynamic. But nobody can unilaterally attack unless the evidence is there. And if they do that, if they abuse their powers, then that's where we have impeachment, we have disciplinary measures that remove those people from office and replace those people, if it was to happen.
So in our government, as a whole, who has more power, the state government or the federal government?
The state governments do, because the state created the federal government. Now, what the states did when they joined together at that convention in Philadelphia, and I've been there, it's fantastic. These guys are my heroes. Again, 26 of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence held seminary degrees. They understood God-given rights. They understood law. Many of them had been trained in Harvard, Princeton, Yale. These were law schools that generally had clergy members that were teaching the classes because they happened to be the smartest, spoke the most languages, and so on. I'm backlaying that because I'm a Christian. I appreciate that rich Christian heritage that we have. So when they were being educated, they saw right now a threat to the colonies as they exist. We had just won a war, and we talk about this in our course. I actually love talking about the historicity of this. We had just won a war against the largest empire in the world. Tragically, we were broke. We had no federal taxing power. We had no chief executive. We had no president at that particular time. We had a president of Congress, both basically no powers. We didn't have a federal judiciary to settle disputes between states. So we had states treating each other like foreign countries, and it started getting really rough. There was rebellions going on. Our currency was failing. Every state was printing their own money. So the states had to come together and unify under the threat of being taken over again by Britain, who was just going to save their money, build their military, and learn from what they screwed up the first time. So we formed together, and we actually take you through the Constitutional Convention, because that's what this was. And we talk about the debates. We talk about how we came up with 2 branches in Congress, how we have 3 branches of government. By the way, in the Bible, it says the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us. Those are the 3 elements of government that the book of Isaiah talks about, that we then took from the knowledge of God's word and put into play. So as the states got together, the states were saying, well, listen, if we create this federal government, we do not want to create a King George. And all of them could agree with that. Some of them had a little bit more confidence in man. In other words, they didn't really see the total sinfulness. Some of them thought, well, in order to be substantial like everybody else, and that's what I hate when people are like, well, these are international standards. Who cares? We're America. We used to be the standard. Let's just keep being the standard. And there's wisdom involved in some things. But so what they were saying is we need to create this government to give it enough power to protect us, but not enough power where, as Thomas Jefferson said, he said, the 2 biggest enemies to man are criminals and government. So let's bar the latter, or let's bar the latter with the change of the Constitution, lest they become a legalized version of the first. So the example there would be a corrupt police officer or a corrupt law enforcement agency who uses the authority of the law to become the criminal. So that's what they did. They did it very painstakingly. They wrote this document over numerous nights with some of the greatest brain power that the world had to offer at that particular time, which I believe was divinely put there in that room. I do not believe the Constitution is a divinely authored document. It's a government document, piece of paper. The Bible is the only thing that's inerrant. And it's needed to be amended, and I'm glad it has in several cases, because there was many blemishes at the beginning of our country, just like there is today. But they were very jealous to make sure that they only delegated certain powers to certain branches. Now, this is where it gets interesting, okay? The Constitution is like a computer program. I ask my kids when I'm speaking in schools, sometimes I get the opportunity to speak to kids, and I say, look, your Xbox, if you're playing the game Call of Duty, and tragically, we all know what that game is. If you're playing Call of Duty, does your game ever stop and all of a sudden it plays Madden football just out of nowhere? And the kids are like, no. And I'm like, well, why not? Because that's not the game I'm playing. The guy who wrote the code for this game didn't put Madden in. Gosh, Jake, what a dumb question. I said, exactly. This is the computer program, the Constitution. This is all Congress is authorized to do. It's like chalk lines on a football field, right? When the ball goes out of play, can that player keep running, go down to the end zone, jump back in bounds, and score? The minute he goes out of bounds, the play stops. We say, hey, play stops right here. We bring the ball back to where it went out of bounds, and we start playing the game again. That's what we're supposed to do with the Constitution. So when Congress gets crazy, the Senate should check the House. When the Senate gets crazy, the House should check the Senate. When the president gets crazy, Congress should check the president. And by the way, when the judiciary gets crazy, our Congress has the authority to shut down every appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Did you know that?
No.
They can shut them all down right now. Congress has that authority. The only judicial branch they can't shut down is the Supreme Court itself. But the president doesn't need to enforce what the ruling of the judge is. I don't know if any of you have ever been to court before, but I've studied court cases. Just because you win a lawsuit against somebody doesn't mean you get money that day.
Right.
You've now got a different agency of government that has to enforce that lawsuit and then collect and so on. So anyhow, to make a long story short, with this whole process, the chalk lines of the Constitution, many of the anti-federalists during the time of the ratification said, look, we'll let you take this Constitution. We don't like it. being farsighted, we can see where government's eventually going to get out of hand, and people are going to be lazy, we're going to prosper, and then we're going to forget about all this. So we want a Bill of Rights to outline definitive rights that we will make sure government will never trample on. Those would be what I would call the brick walls. So like, even though a player is running and he runs out of bounds, that chalk line doesn't keep him from doing it, no more than this piece of paper called the Constitution keeps Congress from doing it. We see it. So they wanted brick walls. Now, if a player runs into a brick wall, he can't get past it. So that's what the Bill of Rights was meant to do. The Bill of Rights was not meant to outline every one of our rights. That would be impossible. You could never name all of your rights, which is why the 9th and 10th Amendment says, hey, look, some of these rights aren't listed here. Those rights belong to the people or the states respectively. So what we didn't write is not the jurisdiction of federal government. The only thing they can do is what our computer program tells them they can do. And the Bill of Rights are the obvious, is the right to the freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, which we're kind of seeing right now, free enterprise, the free market system, and then you also have the Second Amendment right to bear arms, the right to be secure in your person's papers, effects, your property against unreasonable searches and seizures, the right to a jury of your peers, the right to a trial, and so on. And we go through all of those. So that was what the Bill of Rights was designed to do. Now, here's become the philosophy in government is, for example, let's just say, Randy, you and I have contracted together. I'm gonna, I don't know if you have a nice car, but let's just say you have a sweet Monte Carlo from 1985. Remember those? Those were so
I
cool.
do. Yeah, super.
Okay. So it's sitting in your garage and you're just loving it. It's great, but you're going to go on vacation and you hire me to come in because of the gas and all the special stuff in there. You need that car started once a day for the 2 weeks you're done. So you say to me, Jake, here's $100, and then I'll give you 500 when I get back. I need you to open my garage door, turn my car on, let it run for 10 minutes, and then turn it off every day, and then shut the garage door. I'm like, cool. You gave me directives in your mind, you know, this is what I'm going to do. You come back, you open the garage door, the car is filthy, the bumper is gone, there's dents in the door, Taco Bell wrappers all inside of it, the tank of gas is empty, and your windshield's busted. I come to your house and I say, Randy, that is a sweet car, man. Can I get my $500? Guys, tragically, Congress does this a lot. Hey, come on, American people, can I get my salary? Come on, give us more. We got the stimulus. It's so urgent right now. Give us this, give us that. Come on.
Yeah.
You would challenge me by saying, Jake, I'm not giving you your $500. And I'd say, well, why not? Well, because my car is trashed. You didn't do what I told you to do. And I said, yes, I did. I came in every day and I started it up, man. And then you say to me, you broke my car. You took it out. You went driving. I don't know what you did with it, but I didn't tell you you could do that stuff. And I say to you, and this is what the government says to us, well, you didn't say that I couldn't do it. Because I didn't need to say you couldn't. I told you what you could do. Computers understand this. They only do what the code tells them. There's no Terminator that exists, okay? They do what we tell it to do. With government, it's got a lot more colorful. Tragically, this is where we get back to the pagan view of government.
Right.
And now we look to government and it's a form of worship. We look to them for permission for every single facet of our lives.
Yeah.
Now, if we've delegated that authority to government, that's fine. And we did it. We wrote it on the paper. It's in the Constitution. If it's in there, hey, you know what? Whether I like it or not, it's in there. I've got to live by that.
Right.
But if it's not in there, and I never gave it authority, then what in the world is it doing?
Yeah.
It's breaking the rules.
We'll have two questions as we kind of wrap up. And of course, you know, we're kind of at the hour mark, so we'll make them as quick as we can. But I have to think that, so you have the Constitution. I have to think that the Civil War actually was one of the greatest tests of this document, because, and I'm a marketer, so I kind of get that the buzzwords that you use are really important. When we lived in New York, the Civil War was listed as the war of slavery. As we moved to the South, it's the war of northern aggression. And people were fighting for different things, and it seems like the federal government was leading the charge. What impact did that have on where we are even now as a country? Because it seems like that opened the door to a whole lot of new things.
The stance that I take on that is sin always opens the door for tyranny. My sin in my life, what it does is it strengthens the enemy's hold on me. Because if I'm walking in willful sin, then I'm in bondage. I'm not free. I'm not free to proclaim the gospel. I'm always guilty. I'm always lowering my head. I'm always feeling I'm inadequate. I know this experience from when I first became converted, and I was still doing little things that I knew weren't scripturally supported, but I still had that fleshly itch in me that wanted to do them. Until the cross of Christ purified me. And I saw that sacrifice being laid on Christ consistently, and out of love, I did not want to do that anymore. And so if we go back to the war between the states, everybody knows slavery is an abomination. And we discuss this in our class. We don't avoid it. Many people say the Constitution is racist. It is not. We explain why. But slavery is an abomination. If you read the Bible, to steal a man, to steal a woman, to steal a child is a capital punishment. So anybody who believes in chattel slavery, that a man or a woman, just purely because of their skin tone, their social status, their economic class, should be property of another man, is actually committing a capital crime according to the Bible. So I outlay that. So if you're going to protect that type of commerce, live with that kind of commerce, pretend like it doesn't exist. Some people say, well, I don't like the Confederate flag because it represents slavery. The Confederate flag did not represent slavery. It represented the southern states that seceded from the federal government, just like we as Americans seceded from British government. It's not unlawful and unconstitutional to secede. The states were the one that created. The states can move out. The war was started because Lincoln's main campaign promise was to keep the Union together. And nothing to do with slavery. Out of his own mouth, he said that if I have to keep slavery to keep the Union together, you better believe I'm going to keep it. If I have to get rid of slavery to keep the Union together, I will get rid of it. So on its face, the war did not start because of that. Many people were motivated by that, and the end result of it was slavery was later abolished. And a lot of people would say that Lincoln had a change of heart during his Gettysburg Address and so on.
Were states' rights weakened as a result?
Yes, that's what I wanted to step up and say. There were so many executive orders done by President Lincoln because it was considered a crisis time of war. And in fact, he took the whole legislature of the state of Maryland because they voted against going to war with the southern states, and they voted in favor of, many of them were moving towards joining. That's why the Mason-Dixon line is above Maryland. He took their legislature, and this is so ironic, he locked them up in the prison at Fort McHenry, which is where Francis Scott Key penned the words for the Star-Spangled Banner. And Francis Scott Key's grandson was one of the men that was locked up there. He was part of the press there that was writing against Lincoln's actions. Now, all of that stuff right now is past and it's gone. So I'm not going to make any statements. I think you all know I'm a Christian man. I hate slavery. I despise it. I abhor it. Robert E. Lee, who was the general of the southern states, actually emancipated his slaves. I don't know if you know, but Grant, who was the general of the northern, he owned a slave. So the bottom line here is that the federal government felt that it could come in and force the southern states to be a part of the Union. I don't know how much more of an encroachment or infringement upon liberty that can be. This federal institution that was created by the creators of it, then now is forcing those creators to do commerce with it. So ever since then, we've got a different view of government. What we've got is, well, if we philosophically believe that the government is right in what they're doing, then just listen to them. What's the big deal, man? Who cares if it's in the Constitution or not? We're just doing this for now because it's right. You know it's right. I know it's right. How's it right? Well, it feels right. It seems like it's the right thing to do. Is it on paper? Can you show me? Can you articulate? Come on, man. You're being old. You must, you're closed-minded. You're not loving, you're not, whatever the idioms are that they throw at you. But yes, that would be right where it began. And then that created a trend, and we're seeing that continuously now.
Okay, so then that leads me to the second question. As we watch this, And I truly believe that in the homeschool movement that we are raising up the future leaders, the thought leaders, the physical champions that will defend biblical authority, which as you presented, the Constitution is a document that protects biblical authority. So, but as I look at government, what possible difference can my family, or what possible difference can we make? I mean, does a vote even matter anymore? Is like how can we begin to actually impact culture as we begin to learn about the original intent of Constitution and how it supported God's law?
So if I understand what the question is now if I become constitutionally informed or become biblically informed, I understand my civic duty as a Christian, and how can I impact how can I impact the culture? How can we create a renaissance of constitutional thinking or biblical thinking?
Yes.
That is exactly why I do what I do at Institute on the Constitution. It's the only reason I do. If this was not supported by biblical precepts, I would not teach it. I wouldn't have time for it. I don't like watching Fox News, just honestly. I don't watch CNN. I don't get on the blogs and zone into famous talk radio people consistently or constantly. I just don't do those things. What I do care about is the Bible and the biblical view and the old paths, says in the book of Jeremiah. I want to seek those ways. I would like to take I want to work at that, but first I missed my thought on my last thing. When I said that sin is a scourge to any country, and Scripture talks about that. Sin is a reproach to any people. What I believe should happen is the southern states should have been forced to free slaves. That's what should have happened. If they didn't want to, then the federal government's job was to defend those individual God-given rights to life, liberty, and property. If that was the basis of the war, then you've got a just cause here. I don't find that it was, and there's a lot of political interests that were involved in it. However, if that was, I'm fully on board with that. I think the states should have done it themselves, because you can only oppress people so long before God brings somebody into the situation like a Moses to set men free. In this case, I don't think it was one individual person. I think it was a number of clergy members from both the North and the South who were praying for this, working for this, and fighting for this. And so as a result of our sin, now you need the force of government because you're not listening. For example, a cult in the middle of nowhere has all these children and they're practicing polygamy and blah, 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 blah. And they say, well, it's our personal God-given right. Everything is, on the up and up, da, da, da. But they're denying basic human rights. Well, now force has to come in and break that up as a defense towards the God-given rights of those that are being abused. Tragedy is because our sin demands that kind of response from the power of government, it can create all these sticky, slimy, slippery slopes that end up around it.
Right.
That's what I'm always saying. If anything has gone astray with government, if we're taking a turn, and we take a whole lesson to talk about how the government has gone rogue in numerous areas that then created trends that we're still operating in now, in lesson 11, you can always start with sin right away. So I want to put that. So this actually leads into the question, how my family and I do it. I can only speak to my own personal experience and to those experiences of people that share with me in the country. When I understand these things, I teach them to my children. That's important. Like I'm one guy populating the world with 4 kids. I know I feel like a backslidden homeschooler. I should have 12, but I got 4, okay?
At least 9.
I'm working for 4, or at least 9, that's right. You're the real heroes, brother. But I got my 4. So I've already multiplied myself 4 times. So you teaching your kids and your kids being able to understand this, I so encourage you to take this course. And it's not because I teach it. I teach it because it's awesome. Otherwise, I'd be somewhere else if it was doing a better job somewhere else. This is where I am because I feel God's called me here. Those 4 kids make a tremendous impact. You don't know what they're going to be called to do as they get older. That's your first priority, is your home jurisdiction. Secondly, if God calls you to a position of authority, no matter what it is, if it's your company, your business, the homeowners association, your town council, your county council, maybe your law enforcement, maybe your sheriff, maybe your military, maybe your state government. You see how this continues to grow?
Mm-hmm.
You can take these principles, and we educate hundreds of people in all of these local and statewide offices across the country so that they can apply these principles and be part of the restoration, is what I like to call it. We're not in resistance. We don't need a revolution. We need a restoration. We can do this lawfully. And God knows how to strategically place his people. I ask God on a regular basis, Lord, help me impact my culture. You tell me what to do. I don't want it to be my agenda, because sometimes we can create business models and ministries even, and it becomes our agenda. I don't want that. Joseph was not applying to be second in command in Pharaoh's place. I mean, he just wasn't. That's an easy go-to for us, but it's true. You look at many of the kings. David wasn't applying to be the king. Oh my gosh, he just wanted to serve the king. God knows how to raise us up when the time is. Esther wasn't applying to be the wife. Well, she was actually applying for that, but she wasn't applying, for some of the other things she later did. And Mordecai certainly wasn't. So that is the way we can be. But we got to be educated first. We got to have the tools. So when the coach puts us in, we can pitch that last inning. Or we can hit that home run. We can give that base hit. We got to be prepared. The Bible, I'm often reminded, it does not say, "Well done, thou good and successful servant." It says, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." And that actually helps me, because it's so easy to get depressed in the way that our culture is being driven. But we are in such a better position than Babylon. We're in such a better position in the book of Judges.
Yeah.
We're not in a bad position. We got plenty of opportunity.
And I agree 100%. I think the providence of God is something that we don't study a lot, but when you really study historical providence and the way that God moves and places men in places where they need to be, changes the shape of countries and direction of countries, he absolutely can place us where we need to be. I think something that I would encourage anybody that's watching still would be to even if your students aren't ready for a civics course, I would encourage you to get the course, even if it's just the DVD, to be familiar with these concepts and to have an understanding that when you are presented, you actually have answers for what's going on, and you're not just spitting back Fox News and CNN and those things. And I think we get what we lead. And so I can lead my family by having an awareness and making it part of the conversation. I love the story of when the Kennedys were being groomed for power. One of the things their father would do is take newspaper articles and put it at their place at the table. And when they would talk about the issues of the day, then that's where he actually created worldview and shaped them. And I think we have that opportunity. And I'm seeing as my children go, like if you have 4 kids or 9 kids and I shape them, I'm beginning to watch my children impact the culture. And it's an amazing thing to watch the promise of God come true, right? That as we raise them up in the way they should go, they will not depart from it. And especially when we believe that our children have a call and a purpose and we train them in that. Sometimes you sit there and you say, well, I don't know. They don't seem to be displaying that. But all of a sudden it's like, bang, the Lord puts them in the arena and it's all there. They were ready for it. So that would be my encouragement. We will put a post to the course in this feed. So anybody who's watching it, I would highly recommend you to get the course and watch it, even if your kids aren't ready, just because I think that it's really valuable. And if anybody's interested in more of these kind of discussions, please let us know in the comments. I enjoy hearing it. I've learned a lot today, and I think we have a lot to chew on. So thank you, Jake.
Can I also just let people know, if you want to just kind of sample the course, in lecture 1, we make it free right now. You can take it for free. I'll send you the video.
Yeah, and the video is free on masterbooks.com too, I believe.
There we go. Yep. Beautiful. So that's where you want to go to sample it. And I hope you enjoy it. My heart is truly that the next generation can get a hold of this. And, and we need to too as parents, honestly.
what I'll do, I'll make sure in early next week, we'll make sure that video just goes up as well in the Moms and Master Books group so that they have access to watch it as well and get a feel for it. So, because it's an awesome course.
Amen.
So, hey, well, Jake, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
And it's always fun to talk with you and get your thoughts. And I do think the work that you're doing is extremely important.
Amen.
So,
let's do it again. Thank you, Randy.
Yeah, well, thank you. Hey, everybody, thank you. You have a great weekend. I pray the Lord's blessing on your families. I pray that you continue to be strengthened in the power of the Holy Spirit as you train up this generation, as I say often, that is going to face giants that we never even imagined. But yeah, they're just, I believe they're gonna rise and do amazing things. All right, guys, God bless you. We'll talk to you later.